Okay, good. Welcome everyone. Where's the camera? Our meeting tonight takes place on the unceded and traditional territory of the Tsimshian and Smalek speaking peoples. It is indeed a true pleasure to work, live, and play on this land. As an act of reconciliation, I'm reading Richard Wagamese's book, Embers, which it's a wonderfully pictorial book. And if anyone would like to borrow it, I will have it finished by the end of the weekend. And with that, we'll start. So the structure for tonight is I have a number of slides to go through. They will go through very quickly, but they will be available online by tomorrow morning. Many of you have seen these slides before because they start with our foundation of our budget meeting tonight, and that is it's starting with the strategic plan. I won't show everything from the strategic plan because many of you have already attended those meetings, and it is also available on our district website. So we do have a strategic plan, and it is covering the next 5 years. It provides us with direction on our learning journey, but it is a document that will change. It's a living document, and more so than the previous one, which remained fairly static, this one is dynamic and will change as our needs change, as our students' needs change, and as we plan for the future. The strategic plan is created by the board, and from that, it provides a foundation for us in the school board office to work through their wishes on things such as this, which is budget. We have a vision, and our vision is learners on Tsimshian territory will be competent, creative, and critical thinkers with a strong sense of identity. Along with our vision is our mission statement. And again, I'm showing these just as a reminder that these are the words that we use when we have to make decisions. We look at our vision, our mission, our core values, and we also look at what we believe. It helps to guide us in the decisions that we make. And we also have our house of learning. And when we get to our operational plan, which is in development, it is a companion piece to the strategic plan. But our operational plan is largely determined by the decisions that are made on the budget. And that is the activities that are undertaken in the year to support the vision and mission statements. One of the things that I want everyone to keep in the back of their mind is that the COVID epidemic has caused a lot of unintended consequences in the district. This morning, I understand there are still over 45 million people in lockdown in various countries. It may even be higher by now. I know that federally, you're still required to wear a mask on an airplane and through federally regulated airports. We're dealing with what the medical people have told us in our briefings is be aware of the unintended consequences of the pandemic. And there's a number of things that we need to look at, and that is things such as attendance. How has our attendance improved or not improved since the pandemic started? Well, we're looking at our attendance is still not back up to our baseline. It's below baseline. So we're obviously hoping to have improvement, but that improvement comes with actions of all of our staff. Food, housing, income security, these are also issues that the medical people and others in the ministry have told us to be aware of in your planning. We know that many families in the north reported that during the pandemic lockdown portion of the pandemic, that the consumption of junk foods and sodas and sugar drinks increased. And this led to other issues, and that is people were housing insecure as there were a lot of businesses closed and a lot of businesses have not reopened fully. And this has caused problems with income security, and that brings with it many issues for our students with various things such as anxiety and depression. And that's what we're told that we are to be aware of and to try and do what we can to to ameliorate the situation. This is a lengthy slide, and as we recall in university, we were told never have more than 5 lines with 5 words on a slide. This slide will be available in the slide deck. It gives an idea of some of the things that the staff have looked at to say, these are our priorities. And I'm going to quickly move from this slide to more of a summary that maybe makes it easier. And that is, what are the priorities? Well, the priorities are for literacy and numeracy. So literacy and numeracy helping teachers are definitely big on our list. We know from the past where our students were reading, the reading levels and numeracy levels, and we know over the last 2 years that they are not where they need to be. There's a lot of work that's being done. I understand staff were just meeting this afternoon on literacy issues. And we know that helping teachers can help bridge the gap between schools, the isolation between schools, and also just between classrooms. Equity and equity action plans. We know that the graduation rate between Indigenous students and non-Indigenous students is great. It's unacceptable, and we have to eliminate that gap, but also we have to have all of our students graduate on time and move on to whatever their career choices are. And we have found that the Indigenous Coach Mentors program that got its start 1.5 years ago, but only saw a half year, this is the first full year. And the feedback we're getting from the students who are accessing the Coach Mentors is very, very positive. And we're really happy with the work that all of our staff do. And we obviously are proposing that we're keeping Indigenous Coach Mentors. Mental health literacy, well, in the previous slide, I was talking about many of the unintended consequences of the pandemic. Ministry also has started a strategic plan, a ministerial strategic plan on mental health literacy in our schools. And the idea is not to make every staff member a counselor, but to have everyone have an awareness of mental health literacy issues in our classrooms. So we know that the previous this year we had a special purpose grant from the Ministry of Education, and we know that it's allowed employees to go from school to school to talk about this with students. And we would like to continue that program and to build capacity. And our next big commitment, next big priority is our commitment to truth and reconciliation. The DRIPA Act, the Declaration from the United Nations on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, is an act in the province of BC. It is legislation. And although some of the details are still being worked out with FNESC and the Ministry of Education, we have been apprised of things that we have an obligation to do in consultation with our Indigenous Education Council. That includes on budget matters and also anything that affects Indigenous students. We also have taken it on this year. We've just got to start on working, having in-service for all employees on truth and reconciliation matters. This is an in-service. Lori Berger and the Indigenous education staff attend, and it's to bring it all together on, we are on Tsimshian territory, and what is truth and reconciliation? What does it mean? And how can I support the goals of truth and reconciliation in our classrooms? We got to start this year, but we've only trained in service. It'll be yeah, this is our second group is we'll be going through now, and we meet twice for each cohort. So that will continue in September. We also ran a budget survey, and I know our Secretary Treasurer will go into some greater detail. That survey will also be posted, the survey results, and I believe there were 219 responses, and the responses are varied, and I just pulled a few. It's a block, so these all came in at the exact same time, and it's just random. And it's just to give you an example of, there's a lot of competing things. There's different things that people want. And we had students who voiced their opinion on what they'd like to see. We had parents, we had staff. And so we do have a wealth of knowledge of what people are looking for in our budget responses. So for me, in wrapping up the budget process, as a superintendent, it is to allocate limited resources. The ministry provides us with only so much money, and we have to allocate it in what we think is the best way, and we seek input from others. A significant thing to remember tonight is enrollment. Our enrollment is decreasing, and this has a big effect because our revenue is primarily provided to us from the ministry, and it is based on enrollment. And so if you have declining enrollment, you have declining revenue. So those are the things that I wanted to talk about. And now I will introduce you to Cameron McIntyre, our Secretary Treasurer, and he will lead you through the actual budget numbers.
There we go. Thank you very much. What I've done, it's, my challenge in doing the presentation is there's a lot of information, and I want to try to be as complete as possible in the information I'm sharing, and hopefully not get things too confused with everything that's coming out. I've sort of color-coded sections, and I may pause for just quick questions at the end of certain sections. Just following up on what Andrew was talking about, is going to go through the feedback process that's taken place leading up to the budget. That began January 31st, and we had the talking circles, asking these questions: what's most important, what's making a difference. The responses that came that night are already up on the website for people to review. Then we had the partner presentations, which took place on February 16th. The recording unfortunately missed the first group until we noticed it was not recording, and the rest of it is up on the website there. The Survey Monkey, now he said 219, there's 61 people responded, and they could respond with multiple responses.
Stand corrected.
So my slide is not, well, there's 219 responses from 61 people. And it varied, but I think just in terms of who participated, almost half of our participants were students, which was nice to see. There were the 3 questions Andrew mentioned, but that we asked for responses on what will help students succeed, where can we reduce spending, or other comments. In terms of the responses, and we will get the list kind of posted up on the website, but the general areas where most responses came to the first question was the fact that student activities, which would bring engagement to students, there was greater variety in things that were suggested to do. Comments with respect to resources and supplies, comments specifically around student supports and for students with needing extra support, and comments around staffing. In terms of reducing spending, the comments, the 3 top areas there had comments with respect to resources and supplies. What's interesting in this particular question is there were certainly comments that said, don't cut this, or comments that thought that things were spent too much in one place as opposed to another, but suggestions in ways to reduce staffing or administration costs. There were 3 written submissions in terms of things that were asked in the process. The trustees, I believe, received the first letter from library assistants seeking essentially a status quo. There was a request for the creation of sort of a transitional basketball academy. And there was also a request that kind of came through health and safety to have AEDs available in all of our buildings, which is not currently the case. So that's the feedback to date. Just to follow up on that, I mean, the purpose tonight is I will make this presentation, but we are certainly going to open up the opportunity to make comments from anyone in the gallery to further inform the trustees based on anything that you're seeing tonight. So risk analysis, and starting with what we had said at this time last year and the things we were concerned about with respect to staffing and enrollment changes, impact of the pandemic. And And what happened was we actually had a further decline in enrollments. We had thought it might have climbed back up, but it went down. We did determine in the early part of the year that we seemed to be running over budget on salaries, but we got that managed with the amended budget, and we continue to remain on target to meet our amended budget targets. We had very limited COVID funding this year compared to previous years. And we did have a small problem, but the snow clearing budget was clearly well over budget by the end of December with all the snow we had in that time of year. And so that budget was bumped up for the amended budget. The risk going forward. So, I mean, staffing sort of continues to be there, both recruiting and retention. We're just, you know, May 31st is the deadline for people to advise us if they would be leaving. We have some people going on leaves and various things that we do know about so far. Changes in enrollment we'll continue to monitor. And again, we forecast that it will go down. Our current enrollment in schools is pretty close to that target, but waiting to see what happens in September. With respect to the pandemic, again, we just continue to monitor what public health requires. The next line is sort of a new one, but the ministry is working to update the policy on the appropriate spending of the targeted Indigenous education money. And, you know, we've heard various things, haven't really seen the policy yet in full as it will be implemented, but some of the discussion around the policy has suggested that there may be things that currently are being paid for with that targeted money that may no longer qualify to be paid from that targeted money. And that could present operating challenges through the rest of the budget if we have to now absorb some of those costs from the rest of the budget outside of that targeted money. So we'll continue to monitor that and find out what's there. We don't expect that to impact this year's budget, but it may impact future year budgets and anything other theirs. You know, certainly contingency funds are important to address other matters that may arise, and I'll be commenting on other things that are of a concern to me as we prepare the budget with respect to contingency. Just a brief review, the overall big picture of the budget and what we do. So by far, the majority of our funding is directly from the Ministry of Education. For those students that live on reserve, the ministry doesn't fund us for that. We have that funding from local education agreements, and really the other revenue sources we have are very small. In terms of expenses, it's by far labor, salary and benefits are 87% of the budget. Then supplies and services, there was no money that went to local capital out of the planned budget this year. And then, you know, with respect to local capital, so the ministry capital effectively funds school buildings and school buses, and any other capital need has to be funded else in other ways by the district. And so the operating budget is the source, and most districts are using parts of their operating budget for those other capital purchases. If we were to sell a property, that money would still have to be used for capital, would be available. And as the board's aware, we have some money that has accumulated quite a bit over the years towards getting the middle school replaced, that once that school is approved, we'll have that money come back. That will effectively still be money that's there for capital use. And then what that used for by us is for all of our vehicles other than buses, so our maintenance vehicles, things like computer systems, and we are approaching the point where the SDS is the system that manages our accounts payable and payroll and human resources and general ledger, and that will need to be replaced. And really any significant change to space that's used for school district administration and maintenance. All of those things do need to be addressed with local capital. Right. So an overview of surplus, and we're covering this more regularly now. It is part of the new ministry policies around accumulated surplus that we need to be as transparent as possible and allow people to know the decisions that are being made by the board with respect to surplus. So the June 30, 2021, these were the amounts that were in restricted surplus. And sort of what's happening. So the 21,000 for this year's budget will be effectively used or just carried over for future. The money that's set aside for the IT replacement of vehicles, there was nothing added to that this year, and we haven't spent any yet to this point. There's money that's generated by schools, and that stays sort of with the schools. Indigenous Ed was one line lumped together, and we're breaking it out just to make it clear. The first line is the targeted funding that we get from the ministry. And we're required to use that in the next year, so we forecast that that's all spent. We may or may not completely successfully spend all the targeted money, and if not, that carries over again to the following year. And then the other Indigenous Ed money is money they have generated within that department through the sale of resources. It's quite closely tied in with the Tsimshian Language Authority and things that they have there as well. The learning impact of the pandemic was money we received late last year that we were allowed to carry over this year, and that has been spent in the course of this year. And then there's some training money, primarily into the flex funds in schools that we'll be using some of that this year. The unrestricted surplus is what's available for contingency. So at the end of June, it was 38,000. Based on our budgeted surplus for this year, the forecast is that we would have 183,000 in contingency at June 30th, 2022. And as you can see at the bottom, the policy of the board would suggest that that's not the amount of contingency that should be in place. And Andrew began a bit talking about how do we relate the plan and how do we relate the budgets and how do those come together. I mean, so the ministry has this framework process that now has underway. It's the ministry's accountability to districts and focused on improving student results. The ministry separately has their whole funding program and process and ways that they determine how much funding each district gets. So then the district looks at that and says, okay, so we need to have a strategic plan under the framework that will identify how we will be looking to improve the results for our students. And we're in the beginning phase of where districts are going to be required to sort of have a 3-year financial plan, and they would kind of relate. So they're both sort of longer term looks as to where we're going. We're not required to have it fully in place this year. We're going to talk about it a little bit today, but it'll be a bigger talk next year. And then to specifically have, Andrew mentioned the operational plans, and there's still a bit of a work in progress for us, but they focus much more on what are we doing this year, as does the annual budget. And so Andrew's reviewed with you from the strategic plan and the strategic priorities that we're focused on, and we'll hope to be able to address how those are being met as we go through this discussion with the budget. When you talk about a 3-year plan, as Andrew said, everything's hinged on enrollment. And that's our actuals for the last 4 years, and our forecast for this year will be forecasted prudently that it would go down yet again, because that just seems to be our pattern as much as we hope to see it turn around and increase. And as you look at this and what your 3-year longer plan will look like, it has all to do with funding protection. And just a review of how that works is there are many calculations done by the ministry in terms of the basic funding provided to districts. So you go through all of those calculations other than the funding protection calculation. Then what you do is you look at the previous year's funding and you take 98.5%. And basically funding protection guarantees we won't get less than that 98.5%. And funding protection then becomes the difference that's needed, if it is needed, to ensure that our funding hasn't decreased by more than that. And following Andrew's rules, this is a slide that you should never put up. It's got all these lines. This is all of the pages of calculations done by the ministry. And what happened is I've highlighted a few of them. This will be on the website if you want to look at it in detail, but like there's sort of 3 purple lines that are basically tied very directly to enrollment. So if we got 50 more students and there's a line for that, and it would say, okay, you should get more funding, you have 50 more students. Some of those students we expect might have special needs. There's lines that say you should get additional funding for those students with special needs. Some of those students might need English language learning support, or they may be Indigenous, and there's lines that say you get more funding for that. And so you would go through those calculations. The green line I have up there is about salary differential. So if your average salary increases and it's greater than the provincial average, you may get some extra funding for those things. But you do all those calculations and you come back to the slide that says, if it's still not more than 98.5% of last year, you'd actually have no new money yet. All right. So I'm just going to go on. I'll come back to that thought in a second. So when I started looking at this and we had our December funding announcement, and this is what we used for the amended annual budget, and funding protection was $1,040,000. And if we're losing about $350,000 a year, that would suggest we have 3 more years that we'll be losing funding. And at the end of those 3 years, maybe finally we might start to see new money. But then we went to the March announcement, which is the preliminary funding announcement for this year that we're building the budget on. And as you can see, the first line was the amended budget line. The next line, we've got 98.5% less money, as should be the case. But because we forecast a decline in enrollment, the amount of funding protection that was needed has increased again in order to keep us at that 98.5%. So it's now at 1.2 million. And that 1.2 million, my rough guess is if we had 100 more students than we currently have, that might be enough to overcome what that funding protection looks like. But what that means is you have 100 more students, we haven't actually got any more funding. So you're going to be hiring more teachers, you're going to be providing other supports to those students based on the existing money you have in place now. And that becomes that argument around contingency. And it'll be a theme for me today is around contingency in terms of what would you do if you have more students in September? Because you won't be getting any more money from the ministry unless you have a lot more students in September. And if that looks out to 3, and this is going out 4 years, the kind of pinkish numbers there is how much money we would lose each year roughly for funding protection. And 4 years out, there's still a little bit of funding protection, but it's more money being cut each year. And that's one of the significant things that the board, and one of the reasons you look at your long-term 3-year plan as opposed to just the current year, is to ensure you're looking into the future to see what else is coming your way for future budgets. And is there any way out of this? Well, like I said, if you increase enrollment far enough, you'll finally get out of funding protection and the district would begin to see sort of real new money. If there was a change to the funding formula, so we are in this process where the ministry had their provincial review, they partly implemented the recommendations that were made, they have not implemented the rest of those recommendations. That's not happened for this year's budget. We don't know if or when it would happen. Personally, I have some hope if it's implemented that would actually result in a funding formula that would be more beneficial for us. But I don't know actually what that new formula looks like, so I can't say that with certainty. And otherwise, provincially, if there were some changes to collective agreements that changed some of the costs that we currently are required to incur, that could happen. I don't think that's a likely thing to happen, but it is a bargaining year and we wait to see what comes from that. I don't know. I've covered quite a bit so far. So before I get into the details of the current year budget, are there any questions anyone has? Here, I'm gonna stop sharing just so you can see more people. People put up their hands. I see Bart. I don't hear you. No. No.
Do you want to go to James?
Yeah. Anyone else?
James Horn.
James?
Thanks, Cap. I have a question regarding the learning impact money. You're showing no forecast learning impact money for the upcoming budget. Is that correct?
That's the funding announcement for this budget.
Unless there's a funding announcement for this budget?
Yeah.
Because what's our cost looking like because this is COVID money, right? Correct?
Well, there's no COVID money at all that we are aware of for next year at this point.
But that's what this is, correct?
This is just the basic funding formula. This is just our regular operating funding.
The learning impact is regular operating funding, but wasn't.
Sorry, I didn't quite hear. The learning impact was money we received last year in our operating grant that we were allowed to carry over to this year, and we used that to provide some additional supports this year.
Right.
That's used and gone.
So, but we have costs because of COVID. So we received money last year that was money for covering for COVID impact. Is that a different line to this?
So those have being in special purpose for the most part, the extra money that we receive. So this is just, we're focused on the operating budget here. So like 2 years ago, we had over 900,000 of COVID money. This year, we've had about 100,000, I think, in total. So much less money this year, and there's nothing at this point being announced for next year.
Thank you.
Bart, you want to try again?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Great. Sorry about that. On the old City West guy with technical difficulties. One thing I want to ask back on the slide, just to have some figures sort of roughly in our head. What is the number for the consultants and the stand techs and stuff like that when we looked at PRMS? So when we're at that level, what is your vision in the future of what that would look like if we got to the stage of building a new school and we were recovering some of that money? Just want to know what that is up to date. That's my first question. And then the second one is on Kanata School, just where we're at with that currently. And obviously we just want to know where the potential is and what that could look like for future funds too, and what level we're at right now to be able to get that back on the market. And then my third one is just reflect back, and someone else previously in our trustee group and Cam, I feel like we used to be at labor as around an 82%. And has that increased over the last few years up to 87? Or has it just been a gradual or more of a jump? Because I just always used to have it as like a 81, 82, like when I used to explain budget to like community members when they talked to me about things, I used to just talk about, that 19% is what we're working with a lot of the times if you're trying to just shave that without at some point, impacting employees of the district. So those are my three questions to start.
Okay. So with respect to the middle school and the accumulated historical consulting cost, that's a little bit over $1 million that the ministry would reimburse us once the project is approved. That would be available for the board then to make decisions. Primarily, I think it'd have to go back into capital projects, but it would be there. Kanata is not currently on the market. It's effectively we're having to wait until the project is approved. And so once that project is approved, we would be able to put that back on the market. In terms of labor, I don't know if I ever saw it at 82. I think I might have seen it around 85, and it's gradually growing over time. Certainly we've had, the interesting thing is we get sort of funded and we get increases for labor, but we never get funded for increases for anything else. So as a proportion of your budget, the labor continues to increase. And in addition, as the board's had to make reductions, the board has often focused on trying to reduce those costs so that it has the combination of those things that's resulted in the labor becoming a higher percentage.
Just on that, can you just go farther into the Kanata? And what do you mean by the project hasn't been approved? So I'm not quite sure what that means.
Well, Kanata was one of the potential sites for the middle school. And the ministry wants us to just leave it there in case Treasury Board makes some decision that we're not expecting. So when they give us the final full-on approval that yes, this is the project and yes, it's going to sit beside the existing school, then we would be free to put it back on the market.
Okay, thank you.
I see Janet's hand.
Just backing up on the consulting fees for the school. I seem to remember, Cam, you said it's just over $1 million. I thought last year we were upwards of 1.5 at that point. So you're saying we're only at $1 million plus?
It wasn't 1.5. It was 1 point a little bit. Of course, it's been a bit more this year, but it's over $1 million, but it's not 1.5.
I think we, as a board, need more clarity on how much we're spending on this project. And I don't know, we've been on the board a long time, all of us, and we're still not any further ahead. So I'm just really getting alarmed about the cost and no action on this. So thanks.
All right. Not seeing any other questions. at
Yeah,
this-
James Horn had his hand.
Oh, James again?
Just to follow up on that point, your number is 1 million and a bit that we've already spent on the middle school project of our own money. What's our forecast for this coming year?
Well, the board approved an additional 150,000 as one-time money for this year. We've not spent all of that at this point. Later on in my presentation, I was just going to explain that I don't expect to need to have a budget in the next year, but whatever's unspent of that money, I'd get the board to reserve just if we're not quite done by the end of June. We're forecast to be done pretty close by the end of June to what we have to do. But we would just reserve any of that that's left over for anything that carries over past the end of June.
But at this point, you don't foresee us needing to increase that amount then that we've already allocated?
No, I don't see us needing more than that right now.
Thank you.
Kate?
Thank you. I'm just aware of the time, and I just want to be clear that there's an hour planned for this evening and that we're fine to stay on after that hour since it's 25 to 8.
I don't know, the Zoom invitation was created for longer than an hour.
Okay, great. That's what I was seeing in my calendar, so I just wanted to take note of that for everybody. Thank you.
But ABC meetings typically do not run much past an hour. So
Yeah.
this would be unusual.
All right, I'm gonna go back into the presentation. Yeah, so I'm gonna walk through the budget in the same lines as in the regular reporting the board now gets, kind of more detail at the bottom, but effectively, you know, we have the loss of funding protection. There was also a one-time ministry grant that we haven't being told will get renewed. And there was a one-time grant from a third party. So those come out of the budget. And so, you know, the expected decrease in revenue for the budget is the 535,000. With respect to salaries and wage rates, the largest part of what we spend. So support staff and teachers are in collective bargaining. So there is no budgeted increase. The ministry always tells us in this situation that once the collective agreements are concluded, that they will fund whatever the expected cost increase is for each district. With respect to exempt staff, we do need to make an estimate and provide that within the budget. So there is a small amount provided for exempt staff within the budget. But with respect to teachers, as we worked through all the numbers and looked at it, there is no scale increase for teachers, but there are increased costs. Those come from, we had quite a number of teachers this year who completed additional education, and that moved them from one pay category to the next. Quite a number of teachers who are not yet at the top of the pay scale, which is step 9, and so there are step increases associated to that. Those two lines alone are a little bit over 250,000. In addition, as we did the amended budget, and we had teachers who were away on absences, we reflected that absence in the budget. Some of that would have been covered by TOC costs or perhaps some temps, but we have to have those teachers back to a full salary this year. So all of those things put together does result in some increases to the teacher salary line there. Now, other things that are happening in teachers' salary overall, Andrew's mentioned maintaining 0.5 FTE as a TRC position. The next line is the one that offsets the first slide to some degree, but what it is we have declining enrollment and we start to build the classes in each school, and we build those classes so they comply with the effective agreement and they comply with the school act. We're currently reducing school staffing by 4. So it's just like fewer classes in some schools because of simply the drop in enrollment. In addition, class size and composition provides extra teachers on top of that, and some of those numbers have shifted or moved generally between schools. Those are not operating costs, but just in terms of awareness that there will be other changes to staffing in schools from that. And within the overall budget, management is recommending sort of a no-cost shift, but currently we have 0.8 FTE for literacy and 0.6 for numeracy, and we would plan to shift 0.2 of that over. So we'd have 1.0 for literacy and 0.4 for numeracy within the overall budget. Now, I put big bold note at the bottom, coming back to that theme of contingency. So we've built a budget with 4 less classes. And if enrollment in the fall is such that we need to start to reinstate those classes, the funds for that would come from contingency. And it's hard to predict, but it seems most years we reinstated perhaps one and sometimes more than one class. And so it's just another warning in terms of the need for contingency. And itinerant teachers. So in the current year, we effectively had about 7, but most of those have filled temporary positions or done some TOC work, but there's being maybe a couple of those that were actually charged to the operating budget. With respect to the remedy work, and the remedy work is, again, outside the operating budget, it's paid from a special purpose fund. We're going to purposely staff one position equivalent at the high school and the middle school each. And those will now be staff positions. And we've just ensured that the remainder of the budget includes all 5 itinerant teachers. So it's clearly there in all of the costs that we have. There we go there. All of those things, the last 3 slides combined, results at the moment in a net increase in the teacher salary line of a couple $100,000, as you can see at the bottom. With respect to the principal group and exempt staff overall, the first 2 lines, again, as we did the amended budget, what happened in both of those positions is the incumbents had left early in the year. There was a gap where the position was not filled, and then we successfully recruited replacements. So the amended budget took out the budget for that gap period where they weren't there, and going into next year, they need to be budgeted for the full year. In addition, in a couple of cases, we are aware of leaves for next year, and we are not planning to replace those leaves. And so we've reflected that savings in the overall budget, with a note that at the end of those leaves in the following year, we'll have to revisit that and may need to restore that budget for them. So for that group in total, it's about 53,000 is the net increased cost. Education assistance. And so we've mentioned maintaining the coach mentors. We actually had sort of 2.8 in place because one started a little bit later in the year. So we've added the 0.2 just to make that full. That 81,000, the learning loss, was used for additional EA support. So those come back out of the budget because that was the one-time funding. And again, overall, the net change for all the education and support staff is an increase of about 52,000 in that case. With respect to benefits, I mean, any of those net increases in salaries also result in a net increase in benefits. And in addition, and this is an accounting rule that we have to follow, we have this unfunded obligations that appear on the balance sheet, and they are subject to an actuarial review every 3 years, which was just completed. And the result of that tells us that we will have an increased expense next year of an additional 55,000 related to those unfunded expenses. So overall benefits go up by 159,000. Now, pausing here and going back again, trying to relate this to the strategic plan. So within all of this budget to this point, we have maintained the TRC position. We effectively maintained the coach mentors and literacy and making small increases to those just to make sure they're fully in place. With respect to mental health, so we did have special funding this year that allowed us to do some additional things. We do not yet know if we will get more special funding for next year, but our basic counselor staffing, I just want to summarize for you. So the collective agreement with the teachers will require us to staff 2.65 full-time equivalent. We actually staff 3.18, and we add to that the Indigenous Education Department from their budget another 2.5. So our total counselor staffing is actually more than double the minimum that would be required by the formula. So that's in place, and we do wait to see if we will get some additional funding to do some of the additional work that we were doing coming into next year. Services and supplies, this is the one area costs have actually gone down, but so that other piece, the Indigenous Ed targeted money, was in the supplies and service area. So that was one-time funding using up, and so that comes out of the budget. The one-time consulting money for the middle school, which we just talked about, that doesn't need to be repeated in next year's budget, so that comes out. And if there's any unspent money at the end of June, I'll ask the board to reserve that just to ensure we can finish off. The snow removal budget, which was doubled, is back to normal. We need to add in costs because next year is an election year. And my hope is that board would resume the 45,000 a year of the vehicle funding, which is 0.2% of the budget. So we can continue to have an appropriate money available to replace our aging fleet. So overall supplies and services has actually declined by 235,000, and the extra cost for the 45 for vehicles. And that's the summary of all those things. So you add them all together from all those different places, and currently we're looking at a deficit of 800,000 that would need to be addressed. And that's sort of the minimum. So I'm going to just review from that sort of three options as to what that could look like, what the board could do. So the minimum is this, that, you know, you need to look at making cuts of 800,000 so the budget is at least balanced. That leaves you with the current projected contingency of 183,000, which I'm concerned we will need more of a contingency of that going forward. The next option would be, so if you wanted to fully restore that contingency to the minimum 2% in board policy, that would be an additional 347,000 in cuts, or a total of 1,155,000 in cuts. And you would then have your 530,000 in contingency available. As a board, of course, you can go anywhere in that range. That's what you might do. The next scenario is sort of even unmanageable for me, but the other choice the board could make is to say, like, I'm done with funding protection. And most districts consider funding protection money to be one-time money, as opposed to spending it on ongoing things. You could decide you're going to cut another 864,000, which is the remaining funding protection money, but you could still spend that on a one-time basis. But going forward, you would hope to avoid significant cuts in the future if you've already dealt with them this year. All that being said, as a staff, we haven't come up with 2 million yet of potential cuts. That'll be in the next section that I talk about. You know, and what you restore that on might just be what you cut, or you could make decisions in any case where that would be. I'm going to pause the game before I go into where we potentially might make those cuts, to see if there's any questions about where the budget's currently sitting. Kate?
Thanks. Can you go back again and explain how we're at needing to cut $808,000 the night before our planning to pass a budget?
I'm not sure you mean by the night before.
Our
What
last
again?
meeting before we're planning to pass a budget?
Yeah, we continue to look and work through the lines. I think in many ways, the significant difference between what we last talked about is the itinerant teachers, and just saying, look, let's make sure they're fully in the budget. I mean, they've got guaranteed money, and we've always kind of said, well, there'll be TOC or there'll be remedy. And for the most part, we've done that, but it's not guaranteed. And so we've ensured the full remaining 5 itinerants are included in the operating budget, where they were previously kind of assumed to be just absorbed into the TOC budget or into special purpose. James?
Can you tell us, if you were to do the budget the same way you did it before, what it would look like? What would that change be? Because that's a change you've made to the way you've reported to us. Is that what you're trying to say?
I think it's a bit of a change. It's, you know, we've had many discussions over the course of the last year and a half about itinerants and where there are and how we got the money and what the money's being spent on. You know, we have those 5 that will effectively be remaining currently in the budget. We expect there's going to be work for them. We do know there'll be temporary positions available. We don't know yet, because we haven't got to the end of May, if there will be other people resigning or leaving. But we just want to ensure that that full cost is completely reflected in the budget, so you wouldn't have surprises going later next year, because we seem to be in this challenge of potentially overrunning our benefits and our salaries over the last couple of years, and we want to avoid that going into the future.
So based off a risk basis, that's why this decision was made, to make this number reflect the risk that would come out of anyways of our budget.
Yeah, it's partly risk management. It's partly just based on, for 2 years running now, we've gotten into the fall and we have been running over budget and having to make adjustments. We want to avoid that going forward.
Thank you.
Janet, you're up next.
I guess I'm without words here tonight because, yeah, coming into the last stretch of adopting a budget and sitting on the building and finance, I'm sort of in a not knowing position since we've been sitting there and Christie's been asking and we've been asking, James has been asking, how are we looking this year? And we've been told, oh, everything's looking great. Now we're here tonight, potentially looking at 2 million because like we're forecasting losing, our funding protection, which, we're not, I as a board member, not prepared to even consider at this venue. But when I look at these 5 itinerants, I'm kind of like not understanding why we need 5 when we're in such a pickle with our budget. This is something that, I'm looking at Prince Rupert in general, and you're telling me, okay, well, we might get 100 students. Well, we can't even fit 100 families into Prince Rupert because we have no land mass. We have no housing. We're losing people out of our communities. So I'm just very concerned with what I'm seeing here tonight, that at the last hour we get dropped this bomb.
I'm not sure. Is there something you need me to answer for that? I don't know. Kate, you're
Yeah,
up.
I'd like you to answer why we're here at this hour and so late in the budget that we're hearing now that we're potentially 800, we're cutting more than 800,000. We're going to add to our contingency. We've got all these itinerants and I need to have some answers, because I know that as soon as some of these people that are on the Zoom meeting tonight are probably wondering the same thing. Like, how did we get here?
Well, again, I think I've tried to explain that it's an ongoing learning process and it's based on the experience of the last 2 years and just making sure that we have all
So
of
then
those
why is
costs.
it, Cam, we didn't hear any of this in the building and finance? Christy, I'd like you to pipe in here because did I miss something? My understanding was we were in pretty good shape this year. So did I miss something, Christy? Please, pipe up.
In the building and finance, Janet, I don't think we talked about next year's budget. We just talked about this year's budget. I don't think it was ever, numbers were never forecasted for next year's budget in building and finance.
I thought we did hit on it a bit, that we were still in fairly good shape.
I think in working sessions, it was never as high as 800, but we were lower, and that's what we thought. And I'm guessing
Yes.
it's changed because of itinerants, but yes, it was lower. Yes, you're right.
Yes,
In the
thank
working
you.
sessions, yeah.
All right, Kate.
Thank you. So I have 3 questions. First, with hindsight, should itinerants have always been put into the budget as they are being considered now for all of the 3 past budgets? If you could look back with 2020 vision, first question. Second question, does this 800,000 include the 350,000 taking into consideration for what we're losing from funding protection? And third, I find it a bit misleading that it's reported that if we make a huge cut of $2 million, we'll have a $865,000 one-time funding, because that to me looks like cutting off the bottom of a blanket to sew on the top. So if we can just be more clear about how that's reported. So I think that looks misleading to say if you made a huge cut, then you'd have a ton of money for spending. That's not really a question. So I guess 2 questions. Going forward, with hindsight of 2020, should itinerants have been in the past budgets as they are now? And does this 800K include the 350,000 that we've been talking about that will be cut for funding protection?
So the second question of that is the simplest, that, yeah, when I have that loss of revenue of 455,000 at the first slide, that was the funding protection was the biggest part of that. So that 800,000 includes the loss of funding protection money coming into this year. in terms of the 864 or whatever, like the entire 1.2 million of funding protection is actual funding the district receives. So if you go with just cutting the 800,000, you receive the 1.2 million, and it's effectively then spent within what's there in the budget. If you cut, another 347,000 because you want to restore a contingency, so you've cut your spending, you still have received the money, which means you now have a contingency pool of money that's there. If you cut the last 864, that's the rest of the funding protection. It's still real money that's in your pockets, which is why you could then still spend it. It's just trying to, the concept would be you're going to go from no longer spending funding protection as ongoing money, but you're going to revert it all to kind of one-time money. And so you take the rest of that funding protection and you could theoretically cut it, but then respend it as one-time funding instead of ongoing funding. So that's where the 864 comes from. It is real money. It's just a question of whether you want to leave it in the budget as ongoing spending or whether you want to effectively convert that. With respect to itinerants and what should or should not be in the budget, that's the ongoing debate and challenge that we've been having over the last year and a half, and that's, we're hoping in some ways the internal control review that's underway will help us sort out how we could better have managed that process in terms of the hiring and ensuring their profit reflected in the budget. In hindsight, I can't really say. I was looking forward as much as anyone to see what advice we get as a result of that internal control review.
So if I could just have a follow-up on that, if with hindsight, you wouldn't say that we should have put those in the budget, then what's the logic of or rationale of putting them in now?
Well, my rationale, as I said now, is we've gone 2 years running where we hit the fall and we seem to be overspending, and I don't want to put the board in that position where you're going to go into next year's budget with that risk of overspending. So by saying, this is absolutely, these are people, they are teachers, they are on contract. We're going to just ensure they're fully reflected in the budget, and then we'll see where we go. Christy, your hand was up next.
Sorry, hold on one sec. Okay, sorry for the crappy feed. I am in the parking lot of the Lester Center. I'm trying to wrap my head around the itinerant budget as well. And last year we cut 10 itinerant, or 8 or 7, I can't remember the exact number, it's not in front of me, but we cut those positions. But so I was under the impression that we had itinerants already in our budget. So what is the difference between last year's budget and this year's budget? I'm just trying to wrap my head, it's not computing.
Yeah,
Thanks.
so the remaining 7, like I said, effectively the thought or the process was they're not a teacher salary, they're TOC cost, or they're a remedy cost in the special purpose fund, or what they are. And they may get used in that way to some extent, but there's not a guarantee. Like, I think we have been covering part of those costs in this year's budget because they weren't all used in that way. So that's the change this year.
So so essentially we had them in the budget, but they were under different things. Is that like they were under TTOC, they were under remedy, they were under, but we didn't have them specifically in a line budget? Is that right?
That's right. There's an expectation that there would be ways found to ensure that they were providing TOC support. Like I said, most of them at the end of the day were in temporary contracts when people went on leave.
Okay, and then my other one is just a comment, not a question, just for everybody to maybe think about, our trustees and staff, is it is a lot. 800,000 is a lot. I keep thinking about what we could possibly cut and nothing comes to mind. Before our budget meeting, I would really like another working session, not to go over what we're going to cut, but to go over these slides specifically, because I would really like to go over them mentally on my own to try to grasp and to try to understand them better. And then maybe we could have another question and answer period. Again, not dealing with cuts, but just dealing with the slides, if everybody is okay with that. Thanks.
Yeah, and we do have one more set of slides here to review potential places for cuts. We'll go over those when we finish these questions. Bart, you're up next.
Mine would just be quick on observation that happens every budget, and I ever have a little giggle to myself. But is there a way, just, I know this is only a small budgetary thing, but we got to know who's doing our masters. I bet there's an average every year of 6 that we could throw in the budget, just in your head, be adding. And then obviously we have teachers that are not on the grid that also are not there, and you know where they're progressing. It'd just be nice not to have that. It's not an excuse, but we always throw it in every slide. It's been there for 10 years that teachers are getting that. I mean, it's just one of those observations of mine that it always just goes, we got to be.
We do budget the annual step increases, but it is another cost for next year. So that's sort of always been part of the budget. In terms of who's actually going for further education, I don't have a source of knowing that. We don't always want teachers doing that, but.
I got a recommendation. Let's throw 5 in there. That every year 5 get done, and then it's not something we go, nobody's ever getting it. It's just one of those things. We know it's coming, just, I don't know, pad the budget on that part, just so we don't have it. But it's just one of those observations, because we hear it every year.
Okay, Tina, you're up next.
All right. Can refresh my memory, ABC meeting number 2, what was the projected deficit amount?
I don't know that I gave you one. Sorry, I don't have.
Okay, number 1.
Yeah, no, this is the first time we've come up with a number, I believe, in this round.
Oh, no, we think it's about this, and it was nowhere near 8, so I'd like to know what it was.
That was the working session, and we were somewhere 350, 400, somewhere in there, I think, at the working session.
That's the amount I had in my head.
Yeah.
So you can understand frustration that we've gone from 350 to 800 to a potential 2 million. The night before, the week before, we're supposed to pass a budget. So, you know, to me, that's unacceptable. And what makes it even more unacceptable is I'm having a huge case of deja vu, because we did this last year. Last year, we learned that we had a big deficit at the 11th hour, and holy crap, then we're scrambling to find things to cut. This isn't working for me, and thank God this is my last budget, because in 20 years, it's just getting worse. And it's not that we don't have enough money. There will never be enough money. But with all the things that we started to do after the budget was finished last year, because we did not, the board was very specific, we did not want to find ourselves in that position again, where we were learning that we had huge cuts to make, and it came out of nowhere. So we had consultants come in, and we changed how the request for financial reports that the board would see, all with the obviously rose-colored glasses, insurances, and expectations that we wouldn't be here again. We would know the whole damn year where our finances were. We would know with ample time, oh my God, we got to cut 500. Oh, we better look at this. I mean, we normally, in past years, we passed our budget in April. I suspect we'll be passing this budget in June, because we're nowhere near informed enough or confident enough to pass a budget. The board has 2 jobs: hire a superintendent and govern over the budget. And I'm not going to speak for 6 other people, but I'm sitting here thinking, I don't have a freaking clue what the budget's doing. I don't know what our finances are. I sure as shit didn't know we were 800,000 in the hole. Contingency? Yeah, I know. Contingency are great. I should probably have a savings account. I don't. And you know what? I don't give a shit. And here's why. And I've always said, the children in the seats today deserve the money in the budget for that year. A contingency is great, but it cannot come at the expense of the services we offer students in that year. So while again, last budget, so After this, you guys can do whatever the heck you want, except I have grandkids in the school system, so I'll probably still be a pain in the ass. But here's the thing. So you can have an $800,000 contingency sitting off there just in case. It's a rainy day fund. Yeah. Lots of people absolutely insist on that. I've never been one. It's probably wrong, but whatever. I'm not prepared to vote on a budget that puts $800,000 tucked away, but yet we're going to slash and burn services again, supplies. Do I have to hear that there's no white paper in a school? Will I hear that all next year like we have previously? Got to use all the colored papers. So we've got, lesson plans or whatever you want to print out on colored paper only. My favorite subject the last few years, itinerant teachers. And people are going to think I hate itinerants. I don't. I hate what's happened in this district with itinerants. So you want to have 5 fully paid teachers in waiting. I don't think our district can afford that luxury. We have just graduated 13 teachers in Prince Rupert who are, one I think is in Hartley Bay, one's in Niagara, something like that. But let's say 10. You've got 10 graduated people in Prince Rupert who are Prince Rupert folk who aren't going anywhere. They are on the TTOC list, doing whatever. It's not like you don't have people. Yes, you run short. Well, that's going to happen, but we can't afford to have this little pool over here fully paid just in case we need them. I don't think we can afford that. That's almost $500,000. Well, suddenly our budget's back to, only having to cut $350. $350 is manageable. $850 is not. No, it's not a conflict of interest, Gabby. I don't believe it is. Yes, my son is on that list, but we're talking about a budget. And the conflict rules for this would be what a reasonable person might say. Is it reasonable that I would want itinerants gone? Ryan could be an itinerant, who knows? So no, I don't believe we're in conflict. And if you really want to pull that pin, go ahead. I'm done with this stuff. We keep looking at things like itinerants, like contingency, but everything comes at a cost. So who's going to pay it? The kids. The kids are going to pay it. So we can have a contingency, so we can have a pool of teachers just waiting in case we have work for them. You have your TTOC list. I don't know how big it is, but I know there's 10 more on it. I don't know what it was before they graduated, but I know there's at least 10 more on it. Are they working every day? I don't know. I only know what one's doing. So, when it comes time to actually do these things, I'll just repeat all this stuff because I don't think we can afford them. And if the 6 of you do, terrific, vote for it. Thank you.
Bart?
Just a quick one. Cam, if that is the budget going to just get thrown into the TTO season? So if you went and took that 500, it's just a question, and you were predicting that TTOCs were going to cost 900 grand, because I know that's what one of the numbers was. And I remember when we were, one year we missed by 220 grand, and one year we put it at 1.1 and we were at 850 grand, right, on the TTOCs, because I know that slush fund is flexible. So is that what would happen anyways? Are you just taking it out of there and putting it into a column because it's dedicated and you're going to use these people full time regardless? Is that the intention? Just want clarification. I don't know if it is or not, but.
Yeah. So with respect to replacement costs, you're right, our budget continues to run kind of $1 million, $1.1 million-ish, and it's not just teachers, that's also support staff replacement costs and so forth. And really, I've looked back over time and we've been over 900,000. We've not yet been to 1.1. There's usually a little bit left over in that, but it's could well go over. Some years it's been quite light. It's hard to predict. In this case with these teachers, I mean, it was just to say, look, they are there, they're on contract. They should be fully reflected as teachers going forward. And yeah, the board can look at the total complement of teachers and I'll get to my slides if you're okay next in terms of effectively where some of the cuts might happen, and the board will have that opportunity to debate those. I'm going to go back to finish my last few slides and run through this. So as you make your decisions, these are the same criteria. There has been an update. I'm not going to spend time on that. And when you look at, are you going to cut staffing and teachers in particular? Well, you know, the collective agreement has the very specific requirements that determine the numbers of classroom teachers, preparation teachers for those, library, counseling, and learning services. So the vast majority of teachers fall into those categories. And there's very few opportunities to make reductions in those cases that isn't driven by the collective agreement and student numbers. So, you know, if you're looking at where you make cuts, so then you look at district teachers, and that includes itinerants. They're in district positions. And there's a few other places, you know, you could be making cuts in that area up to, in our view at this point, 800,000 of various positions that would be included in that group. Education assistants, you know, again, none of these are easy. None of these are, you know, decisions that don't have some impact on people, but you could have a reduction in the number of education assistants in terms of balancing the budget. Supplies and services, and these are the same effective categories you've seen be there, the kind of a range of what's there, but the larger end of that range is about 25% of those particular categories. In order to, you know, find the money that's going to be necessary. And the other supplies and service categories, and we haven't touched these as much. It's harder to find. Some of these are, you know, costs that we can't necessarily avoid. But there are, you know, contingencies for contractors and so forth that we could look at. Student transportation or extracurricular funding in particular, if that's left up to fundraising and we fund less from the district. Rentals and leases, the only one that is, you know, any possibility of a change would be out in Port Edward. We're up to the 5-year renewal of that, and we had our first meeting with them today as to whether there might or may not be any change to that particular rent cost. Dues and fees, and that's just having a really hard look at everything that we're paying to be members of, and whether anything that we could reduce. The utility cost, and again, that's one that's a bit unpredictable. We're currently running this year that we might come in about 25,000 under budget. But again, a cold winter or, you know, other increases for the cost of natural gas or anything can kind of impact that one. Other than that, you know, other professionals and vice principals, there is actually, as I mentioned, a reduction this year in terms of people on leave that we're not planning to replace. So there is some reduction there already within the budget, but another area that the board could look at. And just to give you, you know, the cost of those 3 spending proposals that came in the process, the library assistance that we're doing, there's no cost involved in that. It was a request for status quo. With respect to the Transitional Basketball Academy, the process to follow would normally be, let's get the course approved, and then if there's enough student interest, the course will run. In this case, the person proposing this would like the board to sort of guarantee 1 extra block of time to run the course. But we don't yet have the course approved, and we don't know for certain what the interest in that course would be. And then the cost for the ADs is just there, what that would be. So I don't know. I mean, what the key points I was hoping to bring out today first is just to ensure we're looking at that long-term outlook, the impact of funding protection will have over the longer term for the district. In terms of employment outlook, and I know we're looking at potential reductions, I mean, with respect to teachers, between, you know, leaves that will need to be filled, and there is some expectation of people resigning or retiring, but we don't have the paperwork yet. We think we will be finding work for those teachers currently on contract. Restoring contingency is, you know, being a theme throughout this, as you've heard. The concern I have is as our budgets get tighter and tighter, there is less ability to withstand an unexpected cost within the budget as a whole. And in particular, with the reduction of 4 classroom teachers based on current enrollment, there certainly is a risk that we'll have to restore one or two of those, and that would use up the entirety of the existing contingency that's in place. And so that's why I believe there's a need to do more of that. Currently, the board's asked for a special open meeting on Monday, the 16th to debate this. And that's currently in the calendars, and then we would begin the staffing processes following that. More information, certainly the government site, our website, or from Andrew or I, if you have more questions. And it's sort of that time then for anybody who has questions or comments beyond that. And you know, if there are questions from members of the gallery that they would like the boards to hear, I hope we'll make time for that to happen. Tina, you are the first up there.
You mentioned principals, vice principals on leave, and you are not replacing them. I would like to know, one, why are we not replacing them? And two, what is the impact on those schools that will lose them and students?
I'm somewhat concerned just in terms of privacy of people's individual situations, and I would prefer to answer that to the board, probably ending in camera session.
Okay, fair enough. But this is the first I've heard of this too. And I suspect it's a vice principal, and I don't even need to know who it is, where it is, what it is. Here's the thing. A couple boards ago, we fought for implementing vice principals in the elementary schools. Still have the scars. We fought for that. And one of the things that helped make that decision was we were told, actually by UCAM, that it was a net zero cost to the district, pretty much. It was incremental. But what we really appreciated was the opportunity for mentorship, the opportunity for capacity building, the opportunity and really requirement of a responsible board for succession planning. We heard loud and clear, the last thing you want to do is throw a teacher into a principalship green with no support. It's a recipe for disaster for everybody. Sure, they may be top notch. It's still a whole different job. And I don't think anybody on this screen that I look at would argue with that. So I voiced my opinion at the last year's budget when suddenly a VP was missing. There was no discussion, and I get that it's not the board's decision, it's the superintendent's. I get that. But it offends me to no end that we're just willy-nilly, sorry, Andrew, no, your decisions aren't willy-nilly, but it feels like that to me, that something that the board grappled with at the time, and it wasn't a decision we made lightly, but we felt quite strongly and felt very good about it, despite it not being a popular decision amongst certain partner groups. It was good money. It was a good investment. And I can look at this screen and see there's some people in here that they really benefited from that decision. So for us to go backwards and have no VPs, because it looks like we're just chipping them off one by one, really upsets me, offends me. Any big word you want to put in there, because I'm losing my words because I'm just so damn mad tonight. Why would we do that? For the small incremental cost it will actually save.
Janet, you were next.
I just actually have a question, Cam. You're saying that we're displacing 4 teachers. Is that what I heard? Because you cut in and out there. So 4 teachers are going to be removed from their classroom, right?
Well, we have fewer students in schools, and so as we build the school and the number of classes needed for the number of students in the school, it results in a reduction.
Okay, so correct me if I'm wrong. You're reducing by 4, but we're going to keep 5 itinerants. How does this all come into play? I just need to know clarity on this. So 4 teachers are going to be displaced, but yet we're going to put it in the budget for 5 itinerants. Why would we do that? What's the logic behind that? I need some clarification. And my second thing is, you're proposing 10 EAs to be displaced?
The board has to make significant.
I'm just asking, is that,
documents.
okay, I just need to back up here for a second. Did we not, as a board last year, say we didn't want to see library assistants on there or EAs on there again? Like, am I missing something? Someone at least like tell me I'm not losing my mind, because I'm pretty sure we were pretty firm about that.
You aren't losing your mind. I have a pretty good memory for this stuff.
Thank you, Teen, because I'm just confused about we're displacing and then we're adding and.
So it's not an addition of itinerants, it's just reflecting itinerants that are already here. So we're just saying we're putting the full cost of all the teachers in the budget, and then you as a board will decide whether those are positions that will continue or not. But the actual number of classroom teachers is really driven directly by the number of students in schools. Is there anybody else with a question or a comment they'd like to make to the board at this time?
James.
I'd like to address Cam or Andrew maybe the issue that Christy brought up earlier, that as this has been pushed on the board so quickly, are we going to have another chance to discuss this before the board has to meet and make a decision on it?
Yeah, with the wishes of the board, yes, if the board wants to have a working session, yeah, we can arrange that.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, the enrollment is a big driver of a lot of things, but I think there's a lot of things here that are suggestions that the board is going to be looking at, and there has been no decision. So I just want to make sure that people understand that no decision has been made. These are suggestions, and there will be some additional discussions. It's difficult in times of declining enrollment. There are approximately 40 districts that are also looking at deficits of different sizes that they're dealing with, but they are dealing with them and resolving the issues. So there's a few questions in the chat if people want to ask those questions, but if not, everyone gets the chat so you can read the questions or comments. But if anybody has a question.
I mean, I'll just sum up a little bit from my point of view.
Yeah.
Once again, I mean, everybody did have some good points, and you know where we're at, and I was under the impression 100% that a month and a half ago, 2 months ago, whenever that was, I would have had 350 in my head. 800's a complete shock. But at the end of the day, if you go back and recrunch numbers and you define things in a different way, it could come back. Just warning everybody, it could come back to 8, regardless of what went on or how our process was again in 21, 22. What we could have done earlier, could we have saved it? Could we have cut something and stopped it halfway through the year? Absolutely, right? But it'll be interesting when staff takes it back again. And, you know, obviously if it keeps coming back out to that number, then we'll definitely have a good conversation about contingency and what that is, and students that are in our classrooms today, and how we can make sure that they're getting what they deserve in this year's budget and next year's. But it will, regardless, the next board will be behind again with that declining enrollment. That's what's nipping us every year, right? So it's going to come back. So then you just got to be, you know, more diligent and ahead of it, and try to somehow have a better observation. Every year we've somehow I think gets mixed up too is back to the amount of students that are going to be in the classroom, and we don't have as many every time. I don't know how we're missing that ball, but, and I'll tell you, I'll back Janet up on this. There ain't going to be more kids in our school in September. It is not going to happen. It's not. The trend is there. It's babies not having babies. The people who are working to come to this community come here and have their wives and children and families in other places and live other locations. So just an observation, but yeah, we'll be interested to see. We'll have a working session. I agree with that. If we somehow can fit that in before. And options, we have to have options, right? I mean, we can't make it up ourselves as trustees to what we're going to cut. That's a pretty hard thing to do, and we're not living the educational world on a daily basis, right? So staff has to come to us with community, with your stakeholders, with the children in mind, and deliver the best small or items that are going to be the less impact, right? At the end of the day, we've been here before. If we actually went back, Tina, and did 20 years of budget, it'd be interesting to see how many years we cut compared to zero to compared to a wealthy budget by the end of the year. It'd be interesting to sort of reflect, but yeah, that's what I have to say.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, thank you very much, everyone, for attending, and please check the district website for further announcements on the next meeting that would be public. Good night.